She lay there, sprawled across the king-sized bed we used to share like she owned it, her back turned to me, the soft blue glow of her phone illuminating the room more than any lamp ever could. I stood in the doorway for what felt like an hour, coat still on, keys still clenched so tightly in my fist they left marks. My heart pounded louder than the rain hammering the windows. I had come home early, desperate to feel some warmth, some spark. Instead, I was greeted by the low hum of laughter through her nose as she texted someone who clearly wasn't me. When she finally noticed me, she didn't even flinch. She didn't jump up guilty or try to hide the phone. No, Carol just rolled her eyes and said, without even looking at me, "God, you're always lurking. What do you want?" What did I want? I wanted my wife back. I wanted the woman who used to pull me into bed giggling at midnight, who used to kiss me like she might never see me again. But that woman wasn't here. She hadn't been here for a long, long time. In her place stood someone cold, sharp, and so damn distant it was like sharing a home with a statue that sneered. "I just got home early," I said, the words feeling small, pathetic. "Thought maybe we could have dinner together." Carol snorted, still tapping away at her screen. "I already ate." And just like that, the conversation ended. She didn't even bother asking how my day was. Didn't care that I had worked a double shift so I could try to surprise her with an actual evening together. I should have turned around and left then and there. Should have packed a bag, gone to a hotel, and given myself the dignity I was hemorrhaging by staying. But I didn't. I stood there like a fool, clinging to the ghost of a marriage that had died long before either of us had the guts to pronounce it. That night, lying next to her rigid, silent body, I heard her phone buzz twice. Then again. She shifted under the covers, curling even further away from me. I could smell her perfume, sweet, expensive, not the scent she used to wear for me. This one was new, worn for someone else, someone who made her laugh under her breath when she thought I was asleep. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't have to. The way she angled her body away from me, shielding her screen, told me enough. The way she smiled into her pillow after she read whatever he sent her told me even more. Still, I held on to my pride with bleeding fingers. I convinced myself maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe we were just in a rough patch. Yeah, a rough patch that had lasted over a year. The next morning was worse. She bustled around the kitchen with exaggerated energy, acting like the world was sunshine and rainbows. When I reached out to touch her hip, to reconnect somehow, she flinched like I was a stranger groping her at a gas station. "I'm running late," she snapped, brushing past me so hard she nearly knocked the coffee cup out of my hand. No kiss goodbye. No goodbye at all. Just the slam of the door and the screech of tires peeling out of the driveway. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at her empty coffee cup. Lipstick smudged on the rim. She hadn't worn lipstick for me in months. But now? Bright red, perfectly drawn, like a warning sign. That afternoon, something inside me broke. I went into her side of the closet, something I hadn't dared do in months. And what I found twisted the knife even deeper. New dresses, ones I had never seen her wear. Lingerie, expensive, barely their scraps of lace with tags still dangling. A second phone charger hidden behind her nightstand. My hands trembled as I touched the silk of a blood-red dress that was definitely not for date night with her husband who she kept too tired for. I didn't need a confession anymore. The evidence was stitched into every thread, buzzed into every midnight text. Carol was building a whole new life right under my nose, piece by piece, while feeding me scraps of exhaustion and fake apologies. That night, when she came home smelling like whiskey and another man's cologne, I didn't say a word. I didn't ask where she'd been. I just watched her stumble to the bathroom, humming a tune I didn't recognize, drunk and careless. She didn't even notice the way my hands were balled into fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. I was done asking questions. I was done being reasonable. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel sad. I felt something much colder, much sharper settling into my bones. The kind of feeling that doesn't fade overnight. The kind of feeling that writes the first line of a war story. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling in the half-dark, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. Carol was snoring lightly beside me, makeup still smudged across her face from the night before. I watched her for a long time, studying the woman I thought I knew. The woman who once whispered that I was her home. Now she clung to dreams stitched together by another man's hands. Quietly, I slipped out of bed. My movements were mechanical, stripped of all emotion. I made coffee, black and bitter. I didn't touch my phone, didn't turn on the TV. The silence of the house buzzed louder than any noise could. Every corner of our home seemed colder, hollower. Even the sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors felt fake, sterile, like it belonged to someone else's life. I sat there for what felt like hours, coffee turning cold between my fingers, memories playing like a broken projector in my mind. The vacations we used to plan, the lazy Sundays we spent curled up together. The promises, the damn promises. Every laugh and every kiss now soured, rotting inside me, proof that everything I thought was real was a lie wearing my wife's face. At around 7, Carol stumbled out of the bedroom, hair a tangled mess, still wearing last night's dress like a trophy. She didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. She just yawned, grabbed her phone, and scrolled without a word. Her eyes barely flicked to me before she muttered, "Did you make breakfast?" I stared at her, and for a moment, I didn't even recognize the voice in my own head. No, not today. Today, I wasn't going to beg for her attention. I wasn't going to cook for her while she texted her lover, sitting 2 feet from me like I was an empty chair. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes flicked up briefly, confused. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice sharp with the edge of a woman used to having her way without question. "Out," I said simply, grabbing my keys. I didn't offer anything else. For once, I let her feel the vacuum she created, let her squirm in it. I didn't even slam the door when I left. I wanted the silence to hurt more. Outside, the autumn air slapped my face like cold water. It cleared my head just enough for me to think straight. I got in my truck and drove aimlessly, streets blurring past. My mind wasn't on the road, it was on the war I knew was coming. Because make no mistake, I wasn't going to let her burn everything we built without a fight. At a red light, I opened my glove box and pulled out the dusty old manila folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were copies of our joint accounts, the deed to our house, the retirement plan we had started building a decade ago, the empire we had both sworn to protect. The empire I had sacrificed for, sweated for, bled for. She had no idea how much of it was actually tied to my name alone. How many protections I had quietly put in place, thinking I was just being responsible for our future. But there was no us anymore. And suddenly, the safety nets I had built didn't feel like kindness. They felt like weapons. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of a diner on the edge of town, a plan had started to form in my mind. It was rough, savage, but it had clarity. I wasn't going to confront her yet. No, confrontation would give her a chance to spin it, to cry, to manipulate. She had years of practice. I wouldn't win that way. No, I was going to let her dig her own grave first. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window, ignoring the waitress's friendly chatter. My mind was already racing ahead, calculating steps like a chess player. I needed evidence. Hard evidence. The kind a divorce lawyer would salivate over. The kind that would make sure Carol didn't get a penny more than the law forced me to give. If she thought she could torch the life we built together and still walk away with half my world tucked under her arm, she had another thing coming. I was going to let her think she had one. Let her get cocky. Let her slip up. And when the time was right, I would walk away, not just from her, but from the smoldering wreckage she created, leaving her nothing but ashes and regret. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the sunrise blaze across the sky like fire licking up the horizon. It was the beginning of the end. And I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. By the time I pulled back into the driveway that afternoon, the decision inside me had hardened into something unbreakable. No more second-guessing. No more giving her the benefit of the doubt. Carol had made her choice, and now I was going to make mine. The house looked the same on the outside. Same red shutters, same flower bed I used to weed on Sunday mornings while she pretended to be too tired to help. But it felt different. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. I thought about how many times I had carried groceries inside, gifts, flowers, little tokens of a love that had been dying long before I saw the rot. I thought about all the mornings I kissed her goodbye, never knowing she was counting down the hours until she could pretend I didn't exist. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the world too bright and too quiet. Every step up the driveway felt heavier than the last. I wasn't coming home this time. I was walking into enemy territory. When I opened the door, I heard her laugh, a light, flirty sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. It floated down the hallway from the kitchen. And then another voice, a man's voice, low, chuckling. My stomach turned to ice. I froze for a second, the keys still dangling from my fingers. My heart thundered so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I wasn't ready for this. I had planned to gather evidence carefully, patiently. But fate apparently had other plans. I moved silently down the hallway, heart hammering against my ribs. As I got closer, the words became clearer. I swear, if he gets suspicious, I'll just tell him I'm working late again, Carol said, her voice sickeningly sweet. He's too stupid to ask questions anyway. The man laughed. Perfect. Keep milking it, baby. Let him pay the bills while we have our fun. I had heard enough. I backed away slowly, every part of me screaming to storm into that kitchen, to tear the smug grin off his face, to scream at her until the walls cracked. But no, this wasn't the time. Rage would only give them power. I needed this to hurt more. I needed her to feel the full weight of what she was throwing away. I slipped back out the door and let it close softly behind me. I drove away with my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel, a fire burning so fiercely inside me I thought it might consume me whole. But as the town blurred past my window, another thought slipped into my mind. Clear, cold, dangerous. Let her keep thinking she's winning. Let her pile up lie after lie. Let her build her house of cards high enough that when it collapsed, it would bury her alive. By the time I reached the other side of town, I had already made my first move. I pulled into a little strip mall where a discreet private investigator's office sat sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax place. No flashing lights. No big signs. Just a single brass plaque by the door. Martin and Associates. Discretion. Results. Exactly what I needed. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old coffee and leather. The man behind the desk, Martin himself, I guessed, looked up with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many broken hearts walk through his door. "Walk-ins are welcome," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. "Tell me what's going on." I sat down heavily, the chair creaking under my weight. I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid it out blunt and raw. The coldness, the late nights, the strange messages, the laughter in my own damn kitchen. He listened without interrupting, just nodding occasionally, scribbling notes. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands across his chest. "You want pictures?" he said simply. I nodded. "You want confirmation so hard it breaks bones?" I nodded again. He smiled, grim and professional. "We can do that." The retainer fee was high, but I didn't hesitate. This wasn't an expense. This was an investment in my future peace. As I handed over the money, Martin said something that stuck in my mind like a splinter. "You're not just catching her cheating, you know," he said. "You're catching her gambling with her own future. You're just making sure she loses." I left the office lighter than when I had entered, a dark kind of energy buzzing in my veins. Carol had no idea what was coming. She was still playing her little game, still treating me like the blind fool in her perfect con. And I was going to let her. I was going to let her dance right up to the edge of the cliff, laughing, flirting, lying, until she slipped. And when she fell, I would be the one standing at the top, watching without a single ounce of pity, because I wasn't fighting for her anymore. I was fighting for me. ChatGPT. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life, and the strangest. Every morning, I woke up next to Carol, pretending nothing had changed, playing the part of the tired husband who didn't ask questions. She made it easy. The moment I stopped trying, stopped chasing, she barely noticed. She slid into her lies like a snake shedding old skin. Some nights she didn't even come home until after midnight, blaming inventory checks at the store or last-minute meetings. Always so tired. Always so full of it. I didn't argue. I didn't demand explanations. I let her dig deeper, her arrogance blinding her to the fact that I was watching every step. Martin's updates started arriving just 2 days after our meeting. At first, they were simple, Photos of Carol leaving work in a skirt much shorter than anything she wore around me, getting into the passenger seat of a black Mercedes that sure as hell wasn't ours. Photos of her at some sleek downtown bar, leaning into a man whose hand found the small of her back like he owned it. They weren't blurry. They weren't vague. They were crystal clear. She looked happy in those photos, radiant, even like the woman I hadn't seen in years. It hit harder than I expected. Every time a new photo landed in my inbox, it gutted me a little more. Seeing her with him, watching her smile in ways she refused to for me, watching her pour herself into a man who didn't sacrifice half his life to build something real. Still, I didn't react. I bottled the rage, the grief, the raw humiliation, shoved it all down so deep it felt like I might choke on it. I needed her to keep feeling safe, to keep thinking I was too stupid or too scared to notice. On the fourth night, something unexpected happened. I was sitting alone in the living room, flipping channels without really watching, when Carol came home, stone cold sober for once. She dropped her purse by the door and hovered awkwardly in the entryway, like she wasn't sure she was allowed in her own home. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment I saw a flash of something real. Fear? Guilt? Maybe. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something, maybe confess, maybe lie better, but instead, she closed it again. Just turned and headed for the bedroom without a word. The door clicked shut behind her, soft and final. I sat there for a long time after she disappeared, the TV buzzing static into the empty room. Let her be scared, I thought. Let the cracks start to form. I wasn't going to lift a finger to stop it. Every lie she told now wasn't just poison. It was a bullet she loaded into her own future. And I was going to make damn sure she ran out of ammunition at the worst possible moment. The next morning, the air in the house felt heavier, thicker, like even the walls were bracing for impact. Carol moved around in the kitchen in a way that was almost careful. She wasn't snapping at me. She wasn't rolling her eyes. She was quiet, measured. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as I sipped my coffee, pretending to scroll through the news on my phone. She made herself a smoothie, banana, protein powder, almond milk, the same one she used to make when she actually cared about impressing someone. Not me, obviously. Not anymore. You working late again? I asked casually, not looking up. There was the tiniest hitch in her movement. Barely noticeable, unless you were watching for it like a hawk. Yeah, she said after a beat too long. Inventory again. I just nodded like the good little fool she believed I was. She turned away quickly, but not before I caught the faintest flush creeping up her neck. Guilt? Fear? Good. She thought she was hiding it. She thought she was getting away with it. And that belief would be her undoing. After she left, I checked my email. Like clockwork, Martin had delivered. Today's photos weren't from a bar or a restaurant. They were from a hotel. A chain just off the interstate, one of those places that wasn't fancy enough to attract attention but clean enough to get the job done. There was Carol, laughing too loud in the parking lot, her hand gripping the arm of the same man from before. A man I now knew was named Jason, a regional manager from another store, conveniently out of my social circle, just far enough away to feel safe. They didn't even pretend to hide it anymore. At first, the pictures burned. God, they burned. Seeing her smile like that. Seeing her melt against him like she used to melt against me. But the more I stared, the more the fire cooled into something worse, something sharper. Clarity. Carol wasn't just disrespecting me behind closed doors. She was dragging my name, my sacrifices, our entire history through the dirt like it meant nothing. She had already started building her next chapter without me, like I was some outdated appliance she could leave on the curb. And here's the thing about people like Carol. They always think the grass is greener, the life easier, the thrills endless. They never think about the price. They never imagine the bill coming due. But it always does. I spent the rest of the afternoon making arrangements. Meetings with the bank. Quiet calls to the retirement account manager. Setting up layers she wouldn't even know existed until it was far too late. Every document, every email, every notarized signature felt like stacking another brick on the wall I was building between us. A wall she would never be able to climb once it was finished. By the time Carol came stumbling through the door late that night, makeup smudged, reeking of cheap whiskey and smug satisfaction, I was sitting at the dining table, calmly working on my laptop. She didn't even glance at me. She just kicked off her heels, muttered something about being exhausted, and disappeared upstairs. As I listened to her footsteps retreat, I smiled. Let her sleep soundly. Let her believe the empire she was torching would still be standing when she finally turned around to look. Because soon, very soon, she would wake up surrounded by ashes, and there wouldn't be a damn thing she could do about it. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm, feeling sharper than I had in months. There was no more fog, no more second-guessing. I was a man on a mission now, and every move I made had purpose. Carol was still asleep, sprawled diagonally across the bed like a conqueror claiming territory. I stood there for a moment, studying her. The way her mouth hung slightly open, the way her hair stuck to her forehead. For years, I would have given anything to believe she was still mine, still reachable. Now, all I saw was a stranger. And soon, she'd see me as one too. I showered, dressed, and grabbed my files before she even stirred. As I headed out the door, I heard her groggy voice float from the bedroom. You're leaving early? I didn't even turn around. Got some things to take care of. Let her wonder. Let the paranoia fester. At my lawyer's office, the plan kicked into high gear. I laid everything out, Martin's reports, the photos, the financial statements, and watched as the lawyer's eyes widened slightly. Not from shock, from satisfaction. This is comprehensive, he said, tapping the thick stack of documents. Build me a fortress, I said. I want her to walk into court thinking she's winning, right up until the floor falls out from under her. He smiled, thin and sharp. Consider it done. We discussed strategy for hours, how to shift assets quietly, how to secure my pension beyond her reach, how to make sure the house she took for granted would never have her name on it again. Every decision, every signature, felt like hammering another nail into the coffin of the life we once shared. By the time I left the office, it was early afternoon. I sat in my truck for a long moment, the weight of everything I was doing pressing down hard. This wasn't the man I used to be. But then again, Carol wasn't the woman I married either. That night, I played my part flawlessly. I came home with takeout, acting casual. I even smiled when I handed her a container. Carol looked startled, maybe even suspicious. But she accepted it, digging into her food with an almost desperate hunger, as if devouring dinner could erase the guilt sticking to her skin. We made small talk about the weather, about the neighbors, about some TV show she barely watched anymore. I nodded and laughed at the right moments, all while watching her closely. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped a little. Every time I smiled at her, she faltered, like a soldier realizing the battlefield had changed and the old maps were useless. Good. Fear was setting in. The seeds of doubt were sprouting, and I wasn't going to do a damn thing to stop them. As she yawned and said she was too tired again, God, the same old script, I smiled wider inside. Soon, she would be tired of much more than me. She would be tired of fighting battles she couldn't win, tired of chasing a future she would never touch, tired of realizing too late that the man she thought was her safety net had become the architect of her downfall. And the best part? She still thought she was in control. She still thought the game was hers to win. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. A few more days slid by, each one heavier than the last, each one sharpening the blade I was quietly forging behind her back. Carol floated through the house like nothing was wrong, like the walls weren't closing in around her inch by inch. She had no idea. Martin kept feeding me ammunition, photos of her slipping away during lunch breaks, meeting Jason in the parking lot behind that same grimy hotel, sharing kisses so shameless they might as well have been signing the affidavit for adultery themselves. Every file, every photo, every timestamp went into my growing arsenal. By now, my lawyer had everything he needed. We were just waiting for the right moment to pull the pin. And still, I played my part. I came home with groceries, cooked dinners she barely touched, listened to her fake stories about long workdays. I smiled, nodded, poured her wine. I even kissed her cheek once, watched her flinch like my touch burned. Good. Let the guilt rot her from the inside out. The cracks in her armor were starting to show. She was snappier than usual. She picked fights over nothing, a jacket left on the chair, the wrong brand of coffee filters. It was all noise, all distraction. One night, she finally exploded. I was sitting at the kitchen table paying some bills when she came stomping in, her heels clicking furiously against the tile. You're so checked out lately, she barked, crossing her arms. You don't even try anymore. The hypocrisy was so rich it almost made me laugh. Instead, I put my pen down slowly and looked her dead in the eye. For a moment, she faltered. I saw it, the flicker of panic. I guess I'm just tired, I said, my voice calm, almost bored. You know how it is. Her face twisted, anger and confusion warring in her expression. But she couldn't push harder. She couldn't risk it. Not with her own lies stacked so high around her like a house of cards swaying in the breeze. She muttered something under her breath and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I sat there, staring at the door, the old pain still lingering, but duller now, almost academic. It was like watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. Later that night, I heard her crying behind that door. Not loud, not messy, just soft, muffled sobs. I didn't get up. I didn't comfort her. Let her mourn. She wasn't crying because she missed me. She was crying because she could feel it, the ground starting to slip out from under her expensive heels. And she didn't even know yet how deep the fall would be. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I didn't hate Carol. Not really. I pitied her. Because someday very soon, she was going to realize the man she had been treating like an afterthought had been 2 steps ahead the entire time. And by the time she saw it, by the time it clicked, it would already be over. The next morning, Carol was strangely chipper, flitting around the kitchen with forced energy, rattling dishes and humming off-key. She even made breakfast, scrambled eggs and burnt toast, a pathetic attempt to play housewife again. I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching the performance with detached amusement. She was trying. Not to fix anything, no, that ship had long since sunk, but to cover something. Bury her guilt beneath normalcy, patch over the rotting foundation with cheap smiles and empty small talk. She babbled about wanting to plan a weekend getaway, about needing to reconnect, her voice high and bright like a cheap wind-up toy. I nodded along, making vague, agreeable sounds, all while letting her think she was weaving a brand new web. Maybe next month, I said lightly, after things settled down at work. She smiled, that fake, brittle thing she thought still fooled me, and went back to her charade. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A discreet message from Martin. Got something you'll want to see. Me today? I texted back a quick yes and finished my coffee. Carol's back was to me as she loaded the dishwasher. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and said, "Don't wait up for me tonight." She turned, blinking, searching my face for a hint of what that meant. But I gave her nothing. Let her imagination feast on it. Martin's office smelled like old leather and burnt coffee, same as always, but today the air felt different. Heavy. Expectant. He slid a folder across the desk without a word. I opened it and froze. It wasn't just more pictures of her and Jason tangled up in parking lots or sneaking out of hotels. It was receipts. Hotel bookings in her name. Credit card statements. Even emails she'd sent confirming business meetings at times she had sworn she was working late. Proof of premeditation. Proof she hadn't just fallen into a mistake. She had planned this betrayal like a damn business transaction. My lawyer was going to have a field day. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. Tucked into the back of the folder was a printed message thread from a burner email address she had been using. Messages to Jason. And in those messages, she wasn't just trashing me, she was making plans. Talking about what she could get if she played it right. About cashing out after the divorce, taking half the pension, the house, and starting fresh with him. I leaned back in my chair, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. So that was it. It was never just about fun. It was about conquest. About greed. Carol hadn't just cheated on me. She had targeted me. Every too tired excuse, every deflection, every cold shoulder hadn't just been a symptom of her guilt. It had been strategy. Conditioning. She was softening me up, wearing me down, so when she finally drove the knife in, I'd be too numb to fight back. Except I wasn't numb anymore. I was wide awake. Martin watched me carefully, waiting for some explosion of rage. But there was none. Only a quiet, terrifying clarity. "How soon can we move?" I asked. Martin smiled grimly. "Whenever you're ready." I stood, the folder tucked under my arm, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Then it's time," I said. The gears were in motion now. There was no stopping it. I was going to watch Carol walk herself straight into the ruin she built, believing all the while she was untouchable. And when she realized the empire she thought she was stealing had already been burned down by me. She wouldn't even be able to find the ashes. That night, I walked through the front door and found Carol sitting on the couch, TV flickering mindlessly in front of her, a glass of wine trembling slightly in her hand. She muted the show the second she saw me, flashing a tight smile that didn't even bother reaching her eyes. "Hey," she said, voice a little too high, a little too sweet. "How was your day?" I shrugged, setting my keys down slowly. "Busy. You?" She hesitated, the stem of her glass twisting between her fingers. "Same. Lots of inventory. You know how it is." "Inventory." "Right. At a 3-star motel off the interstate, apparently." I smiled, wide and easy. "Sounds exhausting. You must be tired." The words hung between us like a blade. For a split second, her face flinched, the barest crack in her carefully plastered mask. Good. Let her feel it. Let her wonder what I knew. I walked past her into the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge, moving like I had all the time in the world. Let her stew. Let the doubt gnaw at her ribs. We moved through the evening like strangers, small talk, fake laughter, awkward silences yawning between us. She was trying so damn hard to pretend nothing was wrong, but it was written all over her face. Fear, confusion, guilt fighting for space. She wasn't sure where she had slipped up, but she knew she had. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual, dressed sharper than usual, and left without a word. Left her blinking in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of my old sweatshirts like it could somehow stitch together the ruin she had created. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Today was the day. The paperwork was ready. Divorce filing, asset protection locks, formal demands for exclusive control over the pension, house, accounts. All backed with a mountain of evidence, so heavy not even the best blood-sucking attorney could save her. I signed everything with a steady hand. No hesitation. No second thoughts. It was all in motion now. Once the papers were served, she would have 48 hours to respond. 48 hours to watch the floorboards crumble under her feet. 48 hours to realize she wasn't the predator, she was the prey. That afternoon, while she was still playing house, still pouring herself into a fantasy she thought she could control, the process server found her. Martin had arranged it perfectly. She was at work, laughing at something on her phone, when the man in the suit approached her. Carol's smile faltered as he handed her the manila envelope. Her hands trembled when she opened it. She went pale, then red, then pale again. Witnesses said she stood frozen for almost 5 full minutes, clutching those papers like they were a live grenade. And in a way, they were. Because everything she thought she was securing, my pension, the house, the easy glide into a new life funded by the fool she left behind, was gone. Legally shielded. Untouchable. Her carefully constructed fantasy collapsed in one brutal heartbeat. I wasn't home when she finally stumbled through the door that night. I made sure of that. Let her sit there alone with the reality sinking into her bones. Let her replay every smug lie, every manipulative giggle, every whispered plan to cash out, and realize the only thing she was cashing out was a future she had already burned to the ground. She had bet everything on my blindness, and lost everything to my silence. When I finally walked through the door later that night, the house was so silent it felt like stepping into a grave. No TV blaring, no clinking dishes, no fake humming drifting from the kitchen. Just Carol, sitting on the edge of the couch, still clutching the divorce papers in her lap like a death sentence. She looked up at me with wild, frantic eyes, mascara smudged beneath them, her face pale and blotchy. "You're divorcing me?" she croaked, like the words physically hurt to say. I shrugged off my jacket and hung it up carefully, like we were talking about the weather. "Looks that way." "But," she stammered, standing up so fast the papers fluttered to the floor. We can fix this. We just need counseling or time." And I tilted my head, studying her like a stranger. "You think this is fixable?" "I made a mistake," she burst out, voice cracking. "It didn't mean anything. Jason, it was stupid, it was just." Her voice trailed off as she saw the look on my face. I didn't say a word. I just let the silence do the bleeding. Because the truth was, it hadn't been just a mistake. It wasn't some drunk one-night slip. It was planned. It was deliberate. She had built another life in secret, brick by filthy brick. Lied to my face every single day while she plotted how to gut me clean and move on richer for it. And now that the trap had sprung shut, now that the money and the security were locked beyond her reach, she suddenly remembered how to cry. Pathetic. Jason doesn't even want me, she sobbed, wrapping her arms around herself. He said he was never serious, that I was stupid for thinking. I almost laughed. Almost. She thought she was upgrading. Instead, she traded everything for a man who couldn't even bother pretending he cared once the fallout hit. Good. She deserved to feel every ounce of the betrayal she had tried to shovel onto my plate. I'm tired, Carol, I said, my voice low and calm. Tired of the lies. Tired of being a damn placeholder while you lived a second life behind my back. She stumbled toward me, reaching out like she could still salvage something. Please, we can start over. You don't understand. I didn't mean to. I stepped back, and the rejection hit her like a slap. I understand perfectly, I said coldly. You were tired of being a wife. Now you get to find out what it's like to be nothing at all. She collapsed back onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. And I stood there for one long, brutal minute, letting the image of her burn itself into my memory. This was the real Carol, not the smiling bride from our wedding photos. Not the woman who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen. No, this was who she really was when there was nothing left to manipulate. Broken, small, powerless. I didn't rage. I didn't gloat. I just turned and walked upstairs, every step feeling lighter than the last. Because the real revenge wasn't screaming. It wasn't slamming doors. It was leaving her exactly where she had left me. Alone, hollow, choking on the ashes of a life she burned to the ground. And knowing that no matter how hard she cried, there was no saving her from herself now. The next morning, I woke up to the kind of silence that used to terrify me. Back when I was still stupid enough to believe silence meant something was wrong. Now, it felt like freedom. I took my time getting ready, shaved, showered, put on a clean shirt. Downstairs, the smell of stale wine and old tears clung to the air like mildew. Carol was curled up on the couch where I had left her, still in yesterday's clothes, a crumpled blanket half draped over her. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard my footsteps, and for a split second, hope flickered there. Hope I crushed with one look. I didn't say a word, didn't offer pity or sympathy or some half-hearted speech about trying to be civil. Because today wasn't about her feelings. Today was about reality. On the table, I placed a second envelope, thicker, heavier. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, already knowing somehow that whatever dignity she thought she had left was about to be stripped away. Inside were the full terms. The prenup enforcement she had forgotten existed. The pension protections. The documentation showing the house had always been in my name, shielded before she could sink her claws into it. And the financial disclosures her own emails to Jason had helped solidify, proof that she had engaged in planned adultery. And that under state law, it forfeited her claim to any spousal support. Zero. She got nothing. No house. No retirement. No easy check every month to fund whatever broken life she planned to build next. Carol's mouth moved silently as she read, horror dawning slowly across her face. You can't do this, she whispered finally, voice shaking. You can't just leave me with nothing. I let the words hang in the air between us. Let her taste them. You already left yourself with nothing, I said quietly. The day you decided I wasn't enough. She stood up suddenly, clutching the papers, wild and shaking. This is cruel. I gave you my best years. You owe me. I laughed, a low, humorless sound that made her flinch. You gave him your best years, I said. I just paid for them. Her face crumpled, ugly with rage and humiliation. She opened her mouth to scream, to plead, to bargain, but the words caught in her throat. Because deep down, she knew, there was no bargaining with a man who had already left the battlefield. She had treated me like a backup plan, a wallet with a heartbeat. She had gambled everything, thinking I'd be too weak, too loyal, too stupid to protect myself. And now she was watching the empire she thought she was stealing crumble into dust right in her hands. I picked up my keys, sliding them into my pocket with deliberate slowness. I'll be staying at a hotel until the final paperwork clears, I said, turning toward the door. You have 30 days to vacate the house. Her knees buckled. She dropped onto the couch like her strings had been cut. 30 days. 30 days to pack up the ruins of her choices. 30 days to realize the safety net she thought she could steal had vanished without a trace. I opened the door, sunlight spilling across the threshold. Before I stepped out, I glanced back once. Carol sat there, silent now, tears sliding down her face, gripping a future she had shattered with her own hands. No screaming, no begging, just the slow, creeping horror of a woman finally realizing she had set her own world on fire, and there was no one left to blame but herself. And the real beauty? The worst was still yet to come. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow, merciless execution. Carol tried everything. First came the late-night texts, rambling messages about how she was lost, how she didn't know what she was thinking, how we could rebuild if only I would just talk to her. I didn't answer a single one. Then came the anger. She showed up at my temporary apartment once, pounding on the door until my neighbors threatened to call the police, screaming that she deserved better, that she built this life too, that I was nothing without her. I watched through the peephole without a flicker of emotion, because she still didn't get it. She was screaming at a ghost. I wasn't the man she betrayed anymore. I was the man who had already buried her in the wreckage she created. By the third week, reality finally started to sink into her bones. The movers came and packed her things, what little she had a right to take. No house, no retirement, no golden parachute. She ended up in a dingy 2-bedroom rental across town, one that reeked of stale cigarette smoke and broken dreams. A downgrade so sharp it must have felt like falling off a cliff. Jason? Gone. Word got around fast. He wasn't interested in a broke, scandal-soaked woman who couldn't even bring assets to the table. Carol had bet everything on a man who walked away the second she became a liability. Poetic. The final court date came quicker than she probably imagined. She showed up looking nothing like the woman who used to strut through my life, as if it was hers to command. Her hair was dull, her clothes ill-fitting, her eyes hollow. I sat across the courtroom calm, collected, silent. When the judge finalized everything, confirming that all assets remained mine, that she was entitled to nothing, that her infidelity stripped her of any future claims, Carol didn't argue. She just sat there, shrinking smaller and smaller, as the gavel came down like a coffin lid. It was over. Official. Complete. Walking out of that courthouse, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt freedom. Freedom from the lies. Freedom from the exhaustion. Freedom from a woman who had tried to hollow me out for her own gain. I rebuilt my life slowly, carefully. Found a smaller, cozier house. A new routine. New friends. Laughter that wasn't forced or desperate. And every once in a while, when I passed by that rundown complex where she lived, I would catch a glimpse of her, head down, moving fast, trying to avoid being recognized. There was no spark left, no venom, just a woman stumbling through the ruins of her own making, too proud to admit she had lost everything. And I would smile to myself, because the real revenge wasn't in screaming matches or dramatic courtroom battles. It was in the quiet rebuilding. The peace she could never touch again. The life she would always see from a distance. Untouchable, untouching, while she lived every miserable day knowing she had destroyed her own empire with her own greedy hands. And me? I never looked back.